as you can see, we're in a series called The Big Questions, asking life's biggest questions, you know, the big ones, the things you think about all the time. So if you didn't know, I actually have 3 other siblings. Can we get a picture up here so I can introduce you to my 3 other siblings because they are super awesome? Is there a picture up there of my 3 other siblings? This is my 3 other siblings, guys. I'm just kidding. Well, maybe they'll be able to get the picture up there, maybe they won't. But I have a super cool younger brother named Michael. He is 21 years old. I have a really cool older brother, Tyler. Look at, they're so cute! So this is my little brother, Michael. He is 21. This is my brother, Tyler. I forget what age he just turned. I think he's 28. Yeah, because my sister just turned 29. So we're all kind of across the board. And I don't know, now if you have an older brother or sister, you may know the feeling of wanting to be just like them when you were a kid. I don't know if you guys, have any of you copied your siblings when you were younger? Yeah, okay, good. I have a couple of you in here. Some of you think they're super lame, or maybe you are the older sibling. But for me, my sister is 6 years older than I am. So she was the most coolest person in the entire world that I want to be just like. Which is why when I was little, I listened to this alt-rock band called Blue October, which is probably super past your guys' time now. Does anybody know what Blue October is? Yeah, Jen, yeah, Tom. I got a couple adults in the back. Okay, cool. It was this super like emo rock, alt-rock band. And eventually, I learned that there was better music that I actually liked more, but she listened to it, so I listened to it. That's why when I saw her play French horn in middle school and then join marching band in high school, I also started playing French horn in middle school, surprise, surprise. And then when I got into high school, I joined marching band, which I thank her for that because that was actually some of my favorite times in middle and high school. And then I even dressed like her for a while, although that was only because I got all of her hand-me-downs. So looking back, I realized that some of me copying my sister was actually because I really looked up to her. But it was also me trying to figure out who I was, which is really ironic to where if we, can you guys go to this next picture of my sister and I? We actually look like not even sisters. We're complete opposites. Like it's literally down to the point to where she has blonde hair, I have brown hair. She is a total like outgoing person, like loves to go out and hang out with her friends. I like to stay in and read a book. But back when I was trying my sister's interests out and when I was trying to be like her or try different things on my own, I was actually really trying to ask the big question, who am I? And so I was really just using her on how to figure out who I am. So you might not use those actual words, who am I? But you may have wondered or thought about some version of this question. And what we're really asking is about our identity. Our identity is just what makes us us. It's what makes us unique and different from all the other people around us. And if you're like me, you can sometimes struggle or even struggle to even begin to understand how to even answer that question of who am I? And when we think of who we are, chances are we think about it in a few different ways. Maybe for you, who you are is who you want to be. Who you are is who you exactly are right now. You feel confident in the choices you're making. You enjoy the friends you have. You've found the things you're good at. And you like the sense of identity you have in the person you've become. Maybe it's more about who others expect you to be. You know, maybe you've always felt the pressure to live up to expectations of your family or your friends or your teachers and coaches. And they might not actually say it, but you feel like sometimes your parents wish you could be more like your other sibling. Or your teachers want you to be a better student. Or your friends need more time and attention from you. And maybe you feel like you have to act or be a certain way because of their race or family background. And it's not who we actually are as much as it's what people think we should all be. Or maybe your identity is more about who you're not. You think about who you are, and the first thing that comes to mind is, I'm not blank enough. You know, I am not smart enough, when it comes to school. I'm not athletic enough when I play soccer. I'm not outgoing enough in my group of friends. I'm not skinny enough because I don't fit the mold of what other friends look like. I'm not popular enough because I don't have as much friends as that other person. And the list goes on and on. And we define who we are based on the areas where we feel like we don't really measure up. But no matter how we would explain our identity, the question for all of us is the same. It's really the question that's underneath the question, who am I? It feeds our insecurities, it drives the decisions we make, and determines the friends we have. The question is, here, am I enough? Am I enough? And however you'd answer that question, here's some good news, friends. What we talk about tonight has the potential to be a real game changer for you when it comes to moving forward from this question, the way you answer this question moving forward. So tonight we're actually going to look back at an interaction between Jesus and a group of people in the book of John. And so John was just one of the 4 books of the Bible that talked about Jesus' life on earth here. And so in John's book, he records a miracle that Jesus performed. So some of you might actually be very familiar with this passage. But let's go ahead and pull up this first thing here. So it says, after this, Jesus went across the Galilee Sea. That is the Tiberias Sea, if you didn't know. A large crowd followed him because they had seen the miraculous signs he had just done among the sick. Jesus went up to a mountain and sat there with his disciples. It was nearly time for Passover, the Jewish festival, and Jesus looked up and saw the large crowd coming toward him. He asked Philip, "Where will we buy food to feed these people?" Jesus said this to test him, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, more than a half a year's salary worth of food wouldn't be enough for each person to have even a little bit. So we could see here, in the beginning of the story, we could see there's a dilemma. There's a very large group of people that are coming their way, and Jesus is asking the question, how are we going to feed all of this people? And I mean, this is a big question, because if you're like me, when you get hungry, you get hangry. And so you could see here, though, Jesus didn't seem very worried. So we'll go on to the next part. So one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, "A youth here has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that for a crowd like this?" What good is that for a crowd like this? So Andrew mentions that there's a youth. Just some random kid that has food. We aren't even told if this youth is a boy or a girl. They may even be a small child. They might not be our age. They might be smaller than us, younger than us. And in the first century culture, that would have made this kid not so valuable in the eyes of society. In fact, children tended to be viewed only as property. If we were in the first century right now, you guys would only be viewed as what you were worth to what you could do for your parents and for the family. But there's also something else to notice in that passage. Can we pull up that passage again? Thank you. So he mentions that he has 5 barley loaves. He didn't have regular bread. And so that might be super weird to us because we have a bunch of different kinds of bread right now. But he had barley bread. And so it's interesting that John decided to include this very specific little detail, because back then, this was the kind of bread that poor people ate. So you could see here that not only was this person a youth, so they weren't a value in society, but they also were lower down on the rung because they also were poor. They didn't come from a family with a lot of wealth or a lot of social status. And so we can move on here to the next passage. And so Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass there, and so they sat down, about 5,000 of them. That's how many people that were there. And he said, then Jesus took the bread. When he had given thanks, he distributed it to those who were sitting there. He did the same with the fish, each getting as much as they wanted. So Jesus did something miraculous. He did something extraordinary. Friends, he took a little bit of barley bread, a very poor, cheap bread, and fish, which is a really weird meal nowadays, and he fed those entire crowd. There ended up being so much food, left over that there was more food afterwards, after he fed those 5,000 people. Like, that's a lot of food to have leftovers after that. That's an insane miracle. And Jesus is the obvious hero of the story. That's what we can all agree on right here. But John made a point to draw attention to a different hero, the youth in the story. You know, that one person who was not given a name, not coming from wealth or privilege, not having a lot to offer. That person was still featured front and center. And I wonder if John didn't want us to forget the role Jesus gave that kid to have in the story. Jesus could have provided food with no help at all. I mean, he had just come from providing miracles of healing the sick, bringing dead people back to life. And it would have taken like nothing to just drum up food out of nowhere. I mean, he made water into wine. Like, come on. He could have brought food out of nowhere, but that's not what happened. That's not what he decided to do. Friends, Jesus takes the food from a barely noticed child and makes the child an important part of the story taking place. Why would he do that? Friends, because Jesus saw who this kid was. This kid was made in the image of God. And that alone made this person a part of the story worth celebrating. Jesus wasn't limited by what this kid did or didn't have. And the same is true for us. Friends, Jesus says that what we have and who we are is enough, period. You don't have to prove you're enough. Now, I have a little bit of an illustration here, if maybe you don't connect well with that story. So now, I feel like we all can agree in here, at some point or another, we have all struggled with feeling like enough. So take grades, for example. So let's say you may not think you're the smartest person in the world, but you have a certain expectation of what you think teachers, parents, step-parents, guardians might think is enough for getting good grades. So you get that bare minimum of enough, and you think they'll make it happy. And then maybe if you go above what's expected of you with your grades, then they'll be super happy. I mean, that's great, right? If you go above and beyond in your grades and your parents are great, I think that's good. Or take extracurricular things that you're involved in. So maybe you're not the best player on the team or the best at playing an instrument, but in the position you play, there's a certain expectation that you have for yourself, or possibly an expectation that a coach or a director will have for you that equals a good performance in that role. And if you can do what you're expected without messing up, that will be enough. If you're able to do what your job is without messing up, that'll be enough. And that coach or director will be happy with you. And it happens in so many areas of our lives. And we believe that success is based off of what we do, our performance. And it's based off of a great performance in all these different areas. Like, let's say this is with your friends. Let's say this is in another aspect of your life. And this performance inevitably, we think if we're enough in all these places, it inevitably leads to being liked and accepted. And if we're funny enough, if we're smart enough, if we're pretty enough, trendy enough, strong enough, if we're successful enough, and friends, dare I say even Christian enough, then maybe it will just be enough, right? But there's some challenges with that mindset that we have here. You know, the first challenge, we like to compare ourselves to others when it comes to this. Because we know areas that we do pretty well with. We just meet the enough line. We have areas to where we just meet it, we're just below, but we really know those areas to where we don't meet that enough line, that expectations. And friends, we all tend to focus on the negative. I know I do sometimes. And we focus on the people who seem to be above the enough line. And that's where we think our standard is. And which naturally leads us to compare ourselves with people who seem smarter, who seem cooler or taller or better or nicer or more popular or responsible enough. Friends, there is always someone who is going to be better than us. I can guarantee that because there's a lot of people in this world with different gifts, and we're not going to be able to be great at everything. But in turn, that makes us feel like we always have to be doing more and doing better in order to be enough. And then the second challenge with that, we compare ourselves to ourselves. We all have this invisible standard of where we think enough should be. But then let's say, for example, we have a really great game, and that game then becomes that expectation of enough. So then we go ahead and we move that line of enough up to that line, but then you know what? Now we're comparing ourselves at what we did at our absolute best. And it's like we've raised the standard for what's enough, and you've reached that enough line only to find that it still isn't enough. And so you move that line higher and higher in hopes that you will feel enough the next time. But friends, is it really ever enough? And everyone in this room has felt not enough at some point. And I could tell you that even the people who seem like they have it all together, it's a universal experience. And if we're honest, we all have a hard time liking the person who doesn't measure up. We have a hard time liking the person who isn't enough. The person who is us. Doesn't that hurt? Not liking us because we're not enough with these expectations that we have for ourselves? But when we add Jesus to the equation, we can stop trying to prove we're enough. We could take away all of these standards and expectations of what we have put on ourselves to think we're enough. Because he takes whatever we have and makes it enough. It doesn't matter where we fall in those lines because Jesus says we are enough. Jesus takes our feelings of not enough and tells us we are enough. It's exhausting to have so much of our identity tied up in what other people think and what other people expect and what other people want from us. It makes us feel like the bar is always moving and the standard is always changing for what we should be. And maybe that would be enough in this situation today with this person today, but what about tomorrow? Isn't that exhausting? Which is what makes what Jesus says and what Jesus does such good news, friends. His love for us doesn't change. He isn't temperamental. Jesus isn't waiting to see how we perform. He isn't wondering what we can offer for him. You are enough because Jesus says you are enough. That's it. No matter where those lines are, you are enough who you are right now without doing anything. Friends, the feeling of not being enough is a normal part of being human. I'm not going to say that feeling's going to go away. And at some point or another, we'll all deal with it. And in response, we may try to prove that what we have, what it takes. That we have what it takes. We might practice harder, study harder, work harder, put in more energy. We try to prove to people that we're the best athlete. We try to prove to people that we're the most accomplished student or the best employee of the month. Or we try to hide so that no one notices. Feeling like we're not enough feeds our insecurities, so we do everything we can to keep people from seeing it. So what can we do when these feelings come up? We could start by asking these questions. So we could ask, where in my life do I feel like I'm not enough? Around friends, at home, when it comes to grades or sports, or even here at church? And then we ask ourselves, when I don't feel like I'm enough, do I tend to respond by hiding? Do I tend to respond by proving myself? Do I tend to respond with something else? How different would my life look if I stopped trying to prove myself or hide in this area? Or in other words, to put it another way, what would it look like to believe Jesus when he says I am enough? And the last one, when I feel that way, how am I going to remember that I am enough? Now, a tip from my own experience, memorizing what God said is true about me helps when I start to believe differently. So there's a verse, Ephesians 2:10. That might be a good place to start. That's where the verse that I have memorized or I have looked back onto. And so it says, the Apostle Paul writes, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago." That first phrase is a great place to start. We are God's handiwork. We are a piece of art. We are an intentional creation, created for a purpose, a good, wonderful purpose, friends. I imagine that even the youth in the story that we read about just now wanted to provide more than just himself or herself. I imagine that this youth wanted to try to do something to help, and that's why they offered their food to Jesus. But it's also important to note that Jesus was able to create a miracle to create enough where there wasn't enough. That one kid didn't have to do it on his own. Being enough is more than feeling good about yourself, although that is important too. It's about knowing you have everything you need to be a major force of good in the lives of others. You don't have to prove you're enough. Jesus says you are enough. So as we move to our small group to share about this today, think about this question. What's one thing you know is true about who you are? If anything else, start there. Start with one truth about who you are, outside of all of those expectations you have for yourselves. Okay, will you pray with me? Lord, there are so many expectations in this world that outside forces put on us, maybe our friends, our teachers, our families. There are a lot of expectations that we put on ourselves. We think that we have to be a certain way or act a certain way to be enough in certain areas. And Lord, I ask that you take that from us. You help remind us that we are enough because you say we are enough, and that is all we need. When we start to feel like we are not enough, be there with us and take that away from us, because Lord, sometimes, like in the story, you are the one that works through us, and we need your help to be enough because you make us enough. You say we're enough. Lord, I ask that you be with these students in their small groups, that they have good and healthy conversations with each other. And Lord, I ask that you be with them and you show all of them this week that they are enough no matter what they do this week. In your name I pray. Amen.